I'd just like to welcome everyone to Testing Talks Online. We have a very exciting panel discussion for you today called Testing War Stories, How We Won the Battle. This panel discussion topic was inspired by feedback following our last session, where attendees let us know how much they loved hearing our panelists talk about real stories of struggle working as testers, how they overcame these struggles, and how they ultimately improved the quality function at their respective companies. Another piece of feedback we received was that our panelists should enable their cameras during the event. On that note, I want to introduce you to our industry-leading testers, Kathleen Ramos, Cheryl Downs, Carl Wood, Ruchika Mattel, and Dean Cornish. A massive thanks to them for joining us today. I want to extend a massive thank you to our partners, our platinum partner, Tricentis, our gold partner, Headspin, and our two silver partners, Source Labs and Red Wolf and Roche. Our partners make this event possible by funding our webinar platform and prizes, so I encourage you, all the attendees, to check out their websites and respective offerings. I also want to thank my fellow organisers at Testing Talks, Asmongola and Leon Vesely, who are amazing fellow organisers. They help me so much behind the scenes and are incredible friends and fellow testers, whom I have the privilege to work alongside at Tabcorp every day. The reason we created Testing Talks was to create fun and amazing events with our awesome testing community, industry-leading testers and speakers, incredible prizes, delicious catering, fun, and games. With the current pandemic, this has made running such events tough, but we hope Testing Talks Online can fill the gap and provide some added joy for our community until we can come back together in the future, bigger and better than ever before. Thanks to our incredible partners, we have 6 awesome prizes up for grabs for our attendees today, including a JBL wireless Bluetooth speaker, a $200 Amazon gift card, a $100 Amazon gift card, a Google Home Mini, a $200 JB Hi-Fi gift card, and some Bluetooth wireless speakers. 2 of our great prizes can be won by navigating to the following links and filling in a brief survey. I will put these links in the chat now in Zoom. So, the first one is from Source Labs. And I'll just be putting the link there for that survey. We also have a link for Red Wolf and Roche. And these enable you to basically fill in a cool survey, a few little facts about the way you approach testing and see testing. But then you go into the prize for that $100 Amazon gift card, as well as the Apple Home Mini, which is really cool. The 4 other amazing prizes that can be won, like last time, by getting a top score in the Testing Talks Online game, which can be found on the Testing Talks Online website, which I'll link now in chat. And that's it. Please stay tuned, as we will also have a Q&A at the conclusion of the panel discussion. We encourage all our attendees to use the chat feature in Zoom to leave us any questions you would like to have us address. We'll draw the survey game prize after the Q&A. You'll hear from our silver partners, Source Labs and Red Wolf and Wash, on who has won the other prizes. Once again, thanks for joining us today. Let's kick off our panel discussion on Testing War Stories, How We Won the Battle. To actually kick us off today, I want to start with a bit of an introduction by each of our panelists, but we want to put a bit of a spin on it. So what we're basically asking of our panelists is to give us a bit of an overview of their current position, a bit about their career, but also tell us about a defining moment in their career that really shaped them as testers. I'm going to kick this off myself, just to provide a bit of an example, but for me, it's actually quite a personal story, and I've never really shared this before in a public forum. But basically, when I started in the industry, I started as a software engineer. I was actually in iOS. And I remember in my first year, I got to make a couple of very cool apps, Pubs of Tasmania, Skeptical Science, got to work on a couple of great applications. And I remember the company I worked for, they didn't have testers, they didn't hire testers. A big selling point of their company was actually that they didn't need testers, but the testers was done by the developers. They didn't need that quality function. In reality, what I saw was not a great approach to quality. I saw a lot of very talented technical engineers attempting to do manual testing in order to cover the patch that was missing by not having a quality function. But beyond that, it kind of gave me the inspiration to become a tester. I saw a lot of opportunity there, particularly in the automation side of things, for someone that had a passion for testing and a talent for engineering to do some good work in that field. I actually remember my first day at ANZ when I'd transferred from being an engineer to a tester. You know, as an engineer in your first year, you kind of feel like you're really loved. You know, you're honored. It's like, wow, this young guy wants to be an iOS engineer. That's incredible. You kind of feel that from your colleagues. But I always remember my first day as a tester, I was shadowing one of the more senior QAs, and I actually walked up to the board and I was doing one of my first ever handovers. And the BA, I can't remember why. I actually can't remember now. But he basically made it off the cusp joke that testers are the bottom of the barrel. And he basically was saying, you know, you're a tester, you're the bottom of the barrel, you know, you're the lowest of the low here. And I remember it sort of shook me. You can probably see that in my face now. Like, it shook me the way it came out, because I think he was joking, but then I was like, man, that's a pretty big joke to make. And especially having come from wanting to be an engineer at first and discovering this passion for testing, it did shake me. So I went back to my chair and I remember looking across the office. And I kind of had a moment where I was like, why did this man say that? And then I looked around and I kind of realized, like, the testers were all off in the corner at where we were working. They were in the corner of the office. You know, they were quiet. They were just doing what they were told. They were just picking up cards and they were testing them and then putting them through when they were done and tested. And it made me realize that, you know, as testers, we can do amazing work, but we have to be visible in what we do. We have to constantly be pushing the boundaries, but we have to actually show the achievements that we're making all the time, because we are doing incredible work. And especially in the automation field, we're really changing the world as far as software engineering, especially the ones that are leading the front in new automation framework architecture and all those sorts of fields within testing. So I think from that day on, for me, you know, yes, it did punch me in the guts at first, but then it kind of turned me into this animal of wanting to constantly prove how great we are as testers, what we do every day as testers, and how important that is. And also bring the community together. And that's what you see with testing talks as well now, you know, putting us on the front page, showing how amazing we are, and definitely showing that we're not the bottom of the barrel, and that we are an essential and key part of any project team that wants to deliver a product with quality. On that note, I'm going to pass it on to Dean Cornish. Dean.
Thanks, Cam. So I had a similar experience when I first finished uni in 1999. I had been an electronics tester testing motherboards for a manufacturer, and I'd gotten into computer science. And this employer said to the university, please send us like your top 2%. I'm not bragging, I'm just fact, this is how it happened. They sent myself and a couple of others forward, and because I had testing experience, I got the job. And I became a developer in test. So I went into this team, and this company did software simulations for the flow of plastic in industrial molds. And I didn't know much about chemical engineering. I had to learn a lot. And the problem that I had was that they did this build, which they built in Fortran and C++, and it was happening on a Silicon Graphics box, and it was being cross-compiled, and then they wanted the binaries onto these 16 different Unix platforms, Sun, 32-bit, 64-bit, all these different things. So I was a graduate. I'm like, what the hell? How am I going to do this? So I chunked the problem down, and I said, okay, first off, I've got to get the build as it happens every day, and I now have to copy it and deploy it onto Sun, and then I have to deploy it onto SGI and AIX, and then once I've got it there, then I have to install it, and then once I've installed it, then I need to run tests against it. So I got to build tests for it, and there were no tools, so I had to go build them. And then I went, oh, how am I going to look at the results? So I guess I better build the results, and now I'm going to need to be able to compare the results. So I'm going to send them back somewhere else. I'll merge them together, and now I can look at them and see if they're precise. And it wasn't until I finished the task and I fumbled and made mistakes and found a mentor who supported me, and then reflected back on it and realized what I just built, that 15 years later would become known as continuous delivery. But at the time, I think that the key takeaway was we can do a lot if we're not overwhelmed, and if we chunk the problem into smaller parts, and we have good mentors who can help us and guide us and support us when we make mistakes. Had I not had that, I couldn't have done it. And many years later, I've supported others the same way that I was supported. So I guess the the defining thing is that testing is actually a very social field where we look after each other, we help each other out. We're a fraternity. When we go through tough times, we're often there for each other, even if we don't work directly with each other. And that was something that I learned all those years ago that even today is still very true for me.
Absolutely, Dean. Kathleen?
So my journey was a little bit different. When I started out, ever since I was actually 14, I wanted to be a developer. My dad worked in IT, and I guess I just saw it as something really interesting and motivational. And I did a computer systems engineering degree at La Trobe University. And all I wanted to do was be a developer. And once I got into industry, I found actually that development can be really, really fun when you're building something new. But what you usually end up doing is maintaining something that already exists. And when you are maintaining code, especially if it's someone else's code, and especially if it's not been written well, it can be just a bit like Groundhog Day. You're sort of constantly butting your head against a wall of endless tasks that never really change much, for me at least. And I don't mean any disrespect for developers. There were parts of the job I really enjoyed, but what really struck me was that a lot of the time quality isn't present in the code that people were churning out. And what really struck me at the same time was how much I really enjoyed studying software testing and reliability at university. And I'd had an honours year supervisor at La Trobe University, Carl Reed, who became my mentor. And when I found development to be a bit too boring for me, I went back to university, did a PhD in software testing. And through that, I didn't have this as a goal, but I got offered a job as a consultant in a testing company, and I've never looked back. I find testing is always something different and always something challenging. I don't think I've been bored for the whole time I've been a tester. In fact, I'd love to get a chance to be bored once in a while, but it's always something different, always something varied, and you're always talking to so many different people across the life cycle that, for me, it really gave me the kind of challenge that I was looking for and the kind of excitement in the experience. The topic is still IT, the topic is still building quality in, but it's teaching people and coaching them how to build quality in across the life cycle.
Absolutely. Ruchika?
Hi, thanks, Cam. So yeah, similar to Cam, I started off as a software engineer as well back in India with software consulting company named Infosys. Then because that's how the consulting companies work, you get to do what you do whatever you get to do. So I was moved into testing role through Infosys. I loved doing coding. And in the initial days, I was a bit bored during testing as well, because for me, it was just clicking buttons and checking things. But then I had a turning point when I came to Australia. The first job I landed was in a company where I was doing like end-to-end integration testing. And my manager, he was such a great mentor. So he was the one who impacted the way I am, I guess, today. So he mentored me around how testing is not just about clicking buttons and checking things. It's more than that. It's more about looking at the software as a big picture, looking at the risk profile of the project, and how testing is more around reducing that risk in production. Another turning point for me happened when in one of the recent roles, my role was made redundant, and I was told like, developers can do the testing, so we don't need testers. And I was like, oh, what can I do to make testers more impactful and for people not to say that? So that's when I started looking at testing as a more making an impact sort of thing. So testing is not just about, for me, it's not just about testing the application. It's also about looking at the various risk areas and how through the various processes during the SDLC, we can reduce those risks. Right now I'm working with, as a lead test analyst at Telematics, and we are working with IoT devices. Our tech stack does not just have front-end applications. We have got microservices, we have got APIs, we have got mobile apps, web apps, and I get to test all of that. There's not a moment that I get bored or free time, and we are much better place than we were like 2 years ago, I guess, with the strategies and things that we as a team have applied in terms of quality of the software.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, thank you.
Carl?
Awesome. Thanks, Cameron. And thank you very much for organising this for everyone today as well. So I started off in the hardware space. So I was a bit of a hardware junkie, and my role originally was as an engineer to sort of build and deliver service to people who, back before, cloud computing really hit it off, was people would want to run their own data centers, but obviously didn't have the capacity to do so. So they would rent servers from us for a particular period of time to perform tasks when they needed to ramp up and down for software engineering. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the fact that people would come to us with specification. We'd build out a server. I'd, get in the van, drive it down to where their office was, have a talk with them. It was a really, really good way to look at what projects they were working on, what they needed things for. And then on top of that, then we would also have a lot of, bespoke and custom software that they would be building, put onto the servers and installed. And that's when I guess we first needed to start looking at a quality check process that incorporated hardware and software together, which got me really interested, at the task at hand, because one piece of software would work perfectly on one spec, but a different spec, it would run completely different. And, starting off, and it was always like, oh, why would that be? So it got me naturally curious into that. And as I progressed through that, I started to look at, ways of basically, triaging these things, starting with very simplistic, in the hardware world. The first thing is, well, is the power on? Is there something going on there? And then working your way up. And I found with software, it was the same thing, looking for the obvious things first, applying Occam's razor, and then moving up through the chain. My friend I was talking to was working at Optus, and then he basically introduced me to the team that were having a lot of problems due to test environment issues, which I think is something that still plagues most people today. And they're looking for someone to come on board as a technical environment manager and help them, basically put that together. And that's where I started out my career. And I started from an environments perspective and moved into testing software directly from there as well. And again, the one thing I think that it really helped me do was look at the soft skill side of things before necessarily the technical side. And I had to learn to deal with a lot of different teams, a lot of different people from operations, security, development, testing teams themselves, and look at the challenges that were faced on all sides. And I think to your story before, one of the big things was testing was kind of seen as a byproduct team. They were there just to sort of tick a box and get the product out the window. But the really successful teams and organizations I found were the ones that embraced that quality check step and, push forward and really invested in those teams and listened to their feedback as well. So really excited for the discussions today. And that's, where I started out.
Awesome, mate. Cheryl?
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining. And again, thanks Cameron for organising it. I suppose I kind of look at the panelists here and I feel like I might have, and I don't mean this in any, like I'm better than anyone else, but I feel like I had more years of experience, but not necessarily, that's probably because of an age thing. But in terms of, how much experience can be compressed into a year, these panelists are great panelists. So I'm really excited to be here. My journey is quite different to everyone else's, which I suppose shows the diversity of testing. And I think that's a brilliant thing. I started off in psychology. I spent 4 years at university and I did a psychology degree. I ended up getting a graduate diploma in organisational psychology because what I'm really fascinated about is motivating people and understanding how people work and understanding how we can offer it and get the best and the most enjoyment out of our people, but the best performance from people as well. So, yes, I'm in testing, but I think that's something that applies to every different role, whether or not it's in the software industry or not. Ultimately, I did find myself in a testing space and I love learning. So I think that's been a fantastic experience for me across, let's say it's over 25 years or something like that. And it's changed an awful lot as well from the days where, we really were, testers were a team, they were a team together, they were quite separate and segregated and we needed to support each other. So coming back to what Dean said about, we're a tribe of people, we do work together, we're a band, we need to support each other. Cameron was saying, you don't really feel like you're at the top of the tree at any point in time. So it's not a glamorous role in my experience. And I've been around in testing long enough to have fallen out of love with it quite a lot as well. And the reason I come back is that I do love sharing my experience and helping people. And that's the key that I do it. But that falling out of love, I remember I was working on it was an internet banking platform back in the early 2000s, I think it was. And, I sort of finished up that project and just thought, no, I'm going for a big change. And I decided I was going to join the fire department. Something a bit of a change. And in a way, I'm still in the fire department because I still work in testing, but now it's very much about fire prevention. That's the best way to manage these things. So yeah, unglamorous. I feel like, some years you don't get a win at all. And that's why you really need to huddle together and make sure that you work together. I'm just trying to think of anything else that I wanted to share, but it's very much a role about perseverance. It's not always going to go your way. People don't love testing. They think about quality often only when they're in pain. Yes, there are organizations out there that it's the front of what they do, but most of the organizations that I work with, it's about trying to educate them that it is a great thing. We are not makers. And I think if we were makers, we might be looked at it a little bit differently. But yeah, I'm back in love with it. But it took a while.
Thanks for that, Cheryl. Well, one of the real touching moments I had after the last Testing Talks Online was a young lady actually who attended our first Testing Talks Online posted a great video. And she basically posted a video saying how sort of inspiring it was to see me speak so honestly about how COVID has actually impacted our team and even myself at Tabcorp. It's the elephant in the room, and we as panelists want to talk about it as well, and how it's impacted us. But we've got quite a diversity of roles here and career journeys, as you just heard. I'm going to kick it off with Dean Cornish. Dean, how's COVID impacted you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Cam. So COVID, from what I can see, it's one of the first times in our generation where people are having a crisis at the same time, and it's all of us. So people always go through crisis in their career. People get laid off, they have tough times, but we're all in this exact same problem together. And it's almost as though every one of us is waiting for it to be our turn, for it to be really bad. What I have found is that collaboration has changed. Tools that we used to use as a fallback are now the primary mechanism. Their glaring deficiencies are now in our face. As testers, I think we can easily become very isolated and lonely. What I've tried to do is to check in with my team in person, one-on-one, very frequently, see how they're doing. And it's often the small things. It's, do you need a chair? Do you need a second monitor at home? And just to make sure that they have human contact. I'd say probably the last thing I'll finish with is the biggest impact is being that when times are tough in business, sometimes a release will be cancelled or a team, their initiative will be shut down. But when things are really tough, whole programs disappear. And when things are like they are now, everything shuts down and everything stops. And I can't recall in all my years in testing where it has been so severe as it is right now. And so to anybody out there, I mean, I'm sure the whole panel is in the same boat. Our hearts go out to you if you've been heavily impacted by this. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, because right now having a job in testing is a privilege more than ever before.
Absolutely, mate. Well said. Ruchika.
Yeah, I agree with Dean on the hardship that COVID has brought upon everyone. So like some projects get cancelled. There might be some projects that are getting started as well in this situation. It might be becoming beneficial from some sort of businesses, but mostly it is a hardship across the board. We also had some companies are having sort of like redundancies and all that. There are people who are losing jobs and all that. is happening. So it's really sad to see people losing their jobs because of the current COVID situation. It's not just in Australia, it's everywhere that it's happening. And it's so sad to see all that. As a tester, the impact that I'm personally having is, so like I said, we do IoT device testing. So we are a telematics shop. So we sell the devices that go into the cars, basically, for fleet management solutions and for driving behavior sort of features. So I am not able to do the testing, basically, the way I could. I'm so sorry if, let me just connect back. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
You're on mute, Cam.
Just give it another go, Ruchika.
Yep. So I was saying that, sorry guys, sorry for the interruption there. Um, so we used to do a lot of drive tests whenever we got a new firmware for the devices to test. And we had certain like network black spot areas that we had set around the city to be able to drive into and test the bad network situations and all that. Now with the COVID situation, we are all stuck at home. It's so difficult to find new black spots in the suburban areas, especially like the static black spots, so we can drive into those areas and test the functionality. So that's one of the issues that I'm personally facing. Let's see, whenever, hopefully we'll find some black spots around. Yeah, so that's the issue that we are having. But the situation has also allowed us to like save time, like the commuting time. I'm just thinking of the positive things out of the working from home scenario. We don't have to spend like 2-3 hours every day on our commute, and also gives us some time back with our family. We can spend more time with family or start new initiatives in terms of helping the community, helping the testing community, and do various things that we can with this time that we are saving. So yeah, just think positive, I guess. Stay strong, people. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Ruchika. Kathleen?
So yeah, I echo Dean and Ruchika's points that COVID obviously has been a horrendous tragedy for the world, and absolutely my heart goes out to the people who are struggling. I think that, and I agree with Dean, in IT, we're really lucky to be in a situation where a lot of us were probably already working online, and it wasn't such a stretch to transition to a working from home model. Within my job with Planet, I work as a practice director of quality engineering and assurance. So that means I build processes and practices for the organisation that are then used on client sites, and also support with strategic initiatives internal to Planet. Within that capacity, and I have to say, and I don't mean to capitalise on a horrible situation, but from my perspective, my work has become a lot easier because Planet transitioned so quickly in the face of this situation. We had our Hyderabad and our Mumbai offices having to transition instantaneously to a working from home model, which was incredibly challenging, getting laptops to everybody from home, getting them extra monitors, all of the facilities that they needed to work from home, making sure people had internet connections. Obviously, that was quite challenging in developing countries. As far as Australia is concerned, in New Zealand, and the UK, we transitioned very quickly. Within the course of about a week, we transitioned our workforce to a largely work from home model. And it has been really effective in actually creating a much greater communication and collaboration between regions, because we're no longer limited by going and visiting the office and seeing the people that are there and communicating and collaborating with the people who are at our office. We've now got a global office, and everyone at Planet is now communicating and collaborating to a level that well beyond the level that we ever did before, which means we've built assets and reusable practices and processes to support our staff who are in delivery on client site, and also to support us in the future, which from my perspective, I mean, I've seen work done in my practice that I thought would take me a year to get done, and it's turned around in a month, and there is my set of assets that I've been asking for. So from my perspective, I see that, of course, it has been a tragic situation. I think the way that it's transformed our world, in some ways has been a real positive, certainly from the perspective of greater communication, greater collaboration, and everybody going through something together means we're sort of becoming one team, well and truly.
Thanks, Kath. Carl.
So similar to Kathleen, I think I work for an organisation that has been structured, especially in the APAC region, to be remote by default. So I have been very fortunate in that respect, and I feel very, privileged to the fact that I have probably been busier over this past few months than I have been previously. It obviously has given us some challenges. Like I do have staff, in the Hong Kong, Singapore regions and interstate as well. So trying to keep touch with them, I think, has been really critical. I don't know how good a job I'm doing with that, to be honest, because I'm a very much someone who really enjoys, interaction in person, at events. But you have to play the cards that are dealt to you. I think from a client's perspective, the biggest thing that we're seeing at the moment is a lot of winding back of OPEX and CAPEX spend. And I think this is where it's impacted a lot of the testing community. For a lot of companies that were set up with, easy transition into remote working, that's been okay, and things have continued to a relative degree of normalcy. To the ones that haven't had these structures or processes before, they've scrambled to move to a digital platform, and the first thing that's been thrown out the door really is the quality aspect, right? They're not running these projects in traditional ways. They basically are saying, hey, we need to get remote working going. We need to get it going now. Get rid of the red tape, get rid of everything, and just put these platforms out there. So companies adopting Zoom, a lot of other remote collaborations, not really integrating a lot of other components either. And what we're seeing is the testing community has been impacted. In other instances where projects are being spun down or continuing on, we've seen a massive rollout of, contracting staff who have been performing testing, and people in the BAU world having to be forced to be pushed into that role as well. So especially, within the airlines, that was the first sort of organizations that we saw that happen. And a lot of other areas that's now happening as well in finance and insurance and those sort of things as well. So that's having a big impact. I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing at the moment is as we roll in and out of different lockdowns in different states, obviously you guys being in Victoria, it's a lot harder there now, is it does create a bit of uncertainty around, well, is this going to be now the way some organizations want to work moving forward? Are we now in a permanent transition state of moving into a remote working component? And if so, then, I guess that sort of moves into the next section that we'll have after we, hear from Cheryl, is what is the role of the tester going to look like, moving forward as well?
Thanks, Carl. Cheryl? Cheryl, you're just on mute.
Very nice. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good. For me personally, and this is not at a company level, but it's my personal journey, is that I'm definitely doing a lot less travel. So in my role, I'm the head of quality for Civica Asia Pacific, and there was a lot of travel that I was doing across Australia and bits around the world as well. So from that perspective, it's actually been quite a lot better. In a similar way to Carl, the company that I work for does have a heavily remote working kind of policy, and it's been great for people individually to be able to do that. But I also feel that it's much busier for me personally, sometimes because those communications aren't necessarily as effective, or people need more support than what they would otherwise need. So for me, I have definitely been crazy busy. We've also got, so I had tickets and airfares and all sorts to go off to the Olympics this year. So just personally, what that means is that that's been cancelled. The holidays, you can't just put them back in the bank, because companies want you to make sure that you're using those holidays as well. So trying to compress 5 days of work, and now I'm working a 4-day week, so it's a lot busier that way as well. I think coming back to what I talked about before, in that testing is very much a community and we work together. We have a lot of virtual catch-ups, so we can catch up over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, which is what we do, but it's also not quite the same. So I think there are different elements that you can see in physical presence that you can't see in a virtual presence, to say, how are you? Are you okay? Is there something I can do to support you? And invariably people will say, look, I'm doing okay, but underlying that, I think there is a little bit more. So I think just trying to break that egg open a little bit, I spend more time with people individually to see how they're doing. And then from a Civica perspective more broadly, I know that we have one area where we work with incredibly sensitive data, and that data needs to be accessed only through secure environments. So when we're saying you can work from home, that's not necessarily been an option for everyone because of that secure environment setup. And finally, coming back to just, you know, we've been able to really get everyone quickly working from home, but across the world, there are different internet speeds, different accesses, power outages. So it's not always just internet. It's actually having access to power and reliable. So I think that's been a challenge for some of our people across the world as well. But from my company particularly, I know that everyone's been doing a fantastic effort, and probably like Kathleen, we were able to switch over incredibly quickly.
I guess tying in as well with the next theme that we're going to be talking about, you know, one of the impacts that we've had from COVID as at a team level is that, you know, a lot of our team members have gone to 4 days a week. And a lot of us have had to use up all our annual leave to support the company and to support each other. You know, in those times, at a project level, you often hear statements like, you know, we'll reduce our workload. But in reality, a lot of the projects didn't reduce their workload. In fact, they continued to try and pump out the same level of features that they were doing before COVID. So one of the things that we've had to do to sort of change the way we work is actually implement something called cross-platform testing. So I'm just going to use one of our projects as an example, and it's actually Kino. So in Kino, you have, like most systems, core systems as well as digital systems. So, you know, you have the back end handling predominantly all the transactions, but you also have the digital side. So you're looking at, you know, web, iOS, Android, and the digital APIs that connect to the back end. You know, we're pretty much down to 2 QAs across the whole of digital now in Kino until we see out COVID. And because of that, you know, the idea that we can have one tester testing web and one tester testing iOS and one testing Android is just not feasible anymore. So, you know, our testers are really having to step up to the plate, learn more than ever, and actually be able to work across iOS, Android, web, and API in order to remove those bottlenecks and be able to get the job done and keep up with the testing. You know, we've had to pull a few extra hours here and there. We've had to introduce training. We've had to introduce new ways of learning, especially around automation, because someone that's an expert in Protractor and Selenium may not have ever used XCUI Test or Espresso for Android and iOS. So it's like, how do you actually get these people, these team members comfortable with these new technologies? But that's just a changing role of the tester, and that's our next theme we're going to be talking about. So how has the role of the tester changed throughout our careers? I'm going to start this one with Cheryl.
Oh wow, such a big question. I think one of the massive changes that I've seen from when I was testing back in the mid 1990s, I suppose, is that testing was just a cluster of people, and we were quite far removed from some of the development. I mean, even with development being on different floors, so that level of communication was never as good. And the loss of information that you would get as you were trying to share that information. It's also changed, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it now, but back in the day, we would do bug dances. Look, I found a defect, how cool am I? And that's almost how you would rate yourself as a tester, was that you found defects, versus now it's very much about preventing defects and what can we do about that. So even automation is great because it's about finding defects faster, I suppose, or proving the absence of defects in some areas faster. But for me, it's really important to focus on that prevention. So now it's testers are working really closely together with the business and really closely together with BAs, product owners, developers, whoever it might be, And through that collaboration, we can think more holistically about the challenges that we're doing, such that we, the automation ideally would not find any issues whatsoever. So I think testing is also seen as a profession. Back in the early 90s, it was, the only people that did testing, they came through maybe from a support space. They were the leftover people, not necessarily regarded in the same way. And these days, I like to see that, great testers are coming through because that's what they want to do. It's not that they've failed at something else. It's physically and, it's embedded in their minds that it's something that they really want to do. So we're getting a lot of better testers, I would say, with really good technical skill sets. Again, back in the olden days, you would find a lot of people who were more those business type testers, user acceptance testers. And I value those people incredibly highly because of the knowledge that they have. But now we're also getting people who are really well rounded with technical skill sets. So that for me is probably the biggest change.
Thanks, Cheryl. Carl?
So I think to echo the point as well is, recently the testing center of excellence has kind of, gone away now. I mean, in most organizations that we deal with, unless it's a large enterprise with a particular regulatory requirement, that whole testing as a shared service model is starting to sort of disappear. And what we're finding is things are much more based around, products and portfolios, and testers are assigned to sort of individual teams or Scrum, tribes or whatever it might be. Now, in a positive light, I mean, I guess what I'm seeing now is testing is no longer the guys in the corner of the room. They're actually heavily ingrained and talking a lot more with developers and BAs and product owners and developing those soft skills, which is fantastic, I think, and it's really helpful for people's career. But to a degree, that's also taken away some of the accountability of the tester. Back in the old days, well, not the old days, but I mean like early 2000s when I started out, if a bug slipped it through to production and it was something that was a valid requirement and it was testable code and you missed it, you got caned. You got your knuckles wrapped. How did you miss this? What is going on? Whereas now, the whole embedded quality aspect of everyone is responsible for quality has kind of taken that away. So I guess, I don't cop as much of a belting as I used to back in the day when things do slip, even though you don't like to see it happen. But I guess a part of the negative component of that is what we're seeing is, before the tester used to have the end-to-end portfolio view of everything and how it worked, from system A all the way down to system Z. And they could help and be a real SME, at times of there was a production incident or if they needed, looking into requirements, that the tester was actually an integral component of that. Moving to a more agile and siloed model, I think has meant that, we've kind of lost that view in a bit of a way. And while testing's become more technical, and automation's become much more of a forefront at, when aligning with a test strategy, I think that a lot of people misunderstand what automation is really intended to do. And they see it as sort of the be all and catch all of everything that is going to solve a lot of quality problems. In addition to that as well, I guess, that the actual persistent view of the QA in the marketplace is also diminished. It's seen now much more as an automation aspect. And the core skills of, proper QA practice probably aren't as valuable as they used to be, which I think is a real shame. And I think potentially now it might be a whole component of the way, people want things now. They want it quickly. They want it done. We can get our food fast. We can get new apps. We get a new phone every year. And I think that's now starting to become much more of the culture of people that, they have those expectations. And so for us, it's very hard to find people who sort of, really have a quality ethos embedded within their organization. And I think if you do have that in your organization, you should feel incredibly lucky, because a lot of people see now testing as sometimes a diminishing return within their organization.
Absolutely. Ruchika?
Can you guys confirm first that you can hear me okay? I'm just testing my...
It's pretty good. It's still a little bit dropping in and out, but it's not too bad. Oh no, that's way off. Ruchika, let me cross to Taffleen while you work out your mic. Taffleen?
Sure. So maybe try without the microphone, otherwise Ruchika next time, see if that works a bit better, perhaps. But we were just testing microphones earlier. Ruchika seems to come and go. But anyway, don't you love technology letting us all down when we're all working from home? So I think, you know, echoing what Carl said, I think with the introduction of Agile brought great things, greater team collaboration and communication within the team. But I think something that was missing when they wrote the Agile Manifesto was the concept of building quality in versus only seeing testing as a function of checking that quality is present once the product is built. And I think that Agile also thought that, you know, test managers and project managers weren't necessarily as needed. Now, I think that to get the work done, it's, you know, the team will churn through the stories and conduct really good quality testing and build quality in if quality is seen as everyone's responsibility. But you definitely, if you don't have someone functioning in the capacity that a test manager used to function in, setting the strategy for testing and the plan across all the sprints and across the full program of work, you might have teams individually working well, but across the end-to-end system, especially in very large complex programs where you've got multiple systems interacting, if you don't have a test specialist up front specifying the way testing needs to be carried out across the full life cycle, that's where you miss risks. As Ruchika said, that's where you miss risks, and you might miss requirements as a result, especially in the integration of the fully integrated system. So I think that you know, perhaps there's an opportunity for the Agile Manifesto to be revamped and for quality to take a front seat. Quality needs to be everyone's responsibility, but it's got to be built in across the full life cycle and not just seen as something that the tester does, of course, but that the full team does.
Absolutely. Ruchika?
Yeah. Yeah, I hope I'm okay now. So yeah, I totally echo what Carl, Kathleen, and Cheryl have said so far. So the industry is moving fastly towards efficiency in testing. We want to deliver fast. We want to still have good quality. So we are moving towards teams where quality is everyone's responsibility. It all sounds very good, and people try to do their best to have quality as everyone's responsibility. But the tester's role come into picture when the quality is slipped by someone. So that's how the testers do the testers are there to basically remind everyone that no, quality is required. It's a requirement. It's not an optional thing when delivering to a customer. So I feel that by bringing, as Kathleen said, that quality needs to be moved upfront in Agile. So I think I'm one of the lucky people who are working in a team where we have tried to, we have moved quality upfront. So we do a lot of things like risk assessments for feature kickoffs. And we do sort of processes like Three Amigos. It's not really Three Amigos. We call it N Amigos now because we involve everyone from the various roles in the product team, like product owner, operational support people, developers, testers, and whoever else wants to be involved in reviewing the stories from the quality aspects, quality as well as DevOps aspect, before we start developing the features. So yeah, I guess if we implement all those sort of processes, we can definitely evolve as a better quality teams. And testers play a pivotal role in all this, I guess.
Absolutely, Ruchika. And I guess that ties in really beautifully to our next theme, which is all about automation testing. But more importantly, how do we implement automation testing in a business where it doesn't exist? So I can offer a bit of perspective on this, having joined Tabcorp about 3 years ago and basically having zero automation, especially across digital and very minimal in core systems. One of the biggest challenges I think we faced is that no one believed in automation testing. I had worked with it and seen good results at other companies, so I knew we had a real opportunity there. And that's definitely the opportunity that I sort of sold to actually get that role, the leadership role at Tabcorp, to lead QA in the digital space back then. But I'll be honest, like we had great ideas that we came up with as a team around how we can implement automation testing. We had the right talent to implement automation testing. But one of the things, and this is a skill set I see some teams unable to sort of implement easily, is the ability to sell what you're doing as you actually are doing it. So, you know, a great example that I love referencing is the fact that, you know, the first major project, we said we're going to do this real as proper as possible when it comes to automation. We're going to have good CI practices. We're going to have automation running on pull requests for every developer commit. Was a project called Abacus, and it was the first really revolutionary digitalization of retail outlets for Tab. So the actual terminals that when you go up and place a bet, actually taking them from 20, 25-year-old legacy systems to digital Angular at the time applications. You know, what we did basically was we said, let's do a showcase. You know, let's actually get the business involved in what we're doing here and show them what we're doing. Now, what it was really simple. I mean, it basically, all we showcased was an application that was in GitHub called Abacus that was hooked up to BuildKite CI that had a single automation test running on actual pull request, and then obviously would pass or fail accordingly. And we took that to the showcase, and you know, in typical fashion, I promoted this showcase as big as I could around Tabcorp. I would tell people in the hallways, I'd send emails over the lines. I even managed to get the technology group email and just send an email to everyone. And one person came to that showcase, and it was the head of digital. So luckily we got the head of digital, who happened to be the person that hired me. But he came along and he was shocked. Like, he was shocked that just for our first sprint on this project, we had all this kind of good stuff that made a lot of sense up from the get-go, that he then started to invite more and more people. And it sounds a bit cliche when you say it, but we basically went from having sort of one person to the next week, to the next fortnight, having sort of 5, 30, 50, to catering. People were starting to bring like beer and food and like pizza and muffins to these showcases on automation testing. And we had business guys, like top GM guys, like that usually wouldn't get involved at a project level, but especially wouldn't get involved in the testing, literally coming on a Friday and being like, this is the best part of my week. Like, we love it when these guys get up and they talk so passionately about testing. You know, there's so many funny stories too, like especially when we were automating some of our legacy systems, where I noticed Devinder from Tabcorp's in the attendees. He did his first showcase. We practiced 3 times for this showcase, you know, in the preparation, because we just wanted to knock it out of the ballpark. And I'll always remember he was basically showing the business benefit of all these automation tests running every time we kind of, you know, are ready to commit code. And one of the GMs asked Devinder, she said, you know, how's this changed your life at Tabcorp? How's this, you know, great for quality? And Devinder, the most funniest reply ever, said, you know, my fingers don't hurt anymore. And the reason he said that was because when you're actually doing the manual testing on the terminals, the EBTs at Tabcorp, you're literally pressing buttons like this all day long. And he'd managed to automate that. And it was those showcases that we did week in, week out that really won over the teams, won over the budget, and really won over everyone. Because even guys that weren't exactly sold on it at the get-go, like we had people that were like, this isn't going to work. But once they started going to those showcases and actually seeing these benefits, seeing it in action, seeing the automation run, seeing everyone impressed, but ultimately seeing us deliver quality systems, they kept investing in it. And the teams got involved, and everyone got involved. And that's why we did have such a QA transformation. I'm going to cross it over to Dean. Dean.
Hi, thanks, Cam. So when introducing test automation into an organization where it's never been there before, one of the most common methods to do that is to essentially build it like a proof of concept, like a hobby project, and start to build it and go, wow, cool, we built something. I guess what I found throughout the years is that when you want to make organizational change and make it actually something that sticks and lasts, I have found the following as a better way of doing it. And that is that when you're changing an organization, you've got team level, you've got middle management level, and you've got executive level. For something to really change the culture, you really have to move all 3 levels. So you might implement it at the team level, but you need to have the support of middle management, and you need to have visibility at an executive level, so that there's constant investment and constant evolution and maturity with that. What can happen is if you start things at just a team level and you build it, when you need to do more with it and you need investment, the middle managers don't know why you're doing it, or they're not seeing the value of it. Conversely, it's also true that an executive can say, we should do blah, blah, blah. And then the middle managers who run the business will go, yeah, I'm not going to really do that, but sure, okay. And then it never even gets to the team and then never gets done. So in my view, the way to introduce this, despite the fact it would be very easy to be exclusive and just do things on your own in isolation, it's actually much harder, but longer term has more effectiveness if you actually bring in different people into the equation and do it together. You'll have to compromise, and you won't be able to do it as quickly as you normally would, but then what you actually will build will last, and will have more people's input and will evolve. And they'll be invested in it. They won't want to see it die. Whereas if you have built something in isolation, and it might be amazingly well built, you run the risk of getting other people offside by not getting their views or their opinions. So that's my take.
Thanks, Dean. Kathleen?
Fully agree, Dean. One of the most successful introductions to automation testing I ever had with a client I was working with, of course, the test manager or the head of testing had a real great understanding of why we would want to introduce automation. And we, could sell it to him really easily. Here's the ROI. Here's how much time we've saved in API level testing and UI testing by implementing these tests at these various levels. And we've reduced regression testing by this much, which has saved you that much. And over the long term, here's your projection of return on investment. But what we recognized is that for the company to continue investing in automation, we needed to sell it to people outside of testing so that everyone else on the team could see the benefit, and not just at a team level, but as Dean said, right up the chain. So we started doing testing showcases. I helped the client actually introduce the concept of, a once a month showcase where they could actually demonstrate live and through some slides as to what they'd actually developed and delivered in quality and testing that month. And we started with the automation. And for the business people and the executives that came along, we gave them a slideshow to show them this was the goal, this was the benefit, and here's the proven ROI. This is the amount of money we've saved you and the amount of time we've saved and the length of time we've reduced in your delivery life cycle. And for the technical people, we gave them the hands-on demonstration of this is the automation suite. This is what it looks like. Here's how it runs. Here's how fast it is. At an API level, it was very fast, of course. So we demonstrated the API tests because that was the simplest and fastest to demonstrate. But it meant that we were communicating in business speak, but also communicating in tech speak. And it was a really effective way of demonstrating value. And we did actually find that we put food on, a couple of $100 worth of just snacks and pastries and sausage rolls and stuff. And I think, if you feed them, they will come. In an online forum, I'm wondering how effective it would be, given that you can't feed people as easily when they're coming to an online session. But I think if you make it interactive and tell everyone, bring your lunch, bring a coffee, whatever, to the session, and it's a great way for you to connect with your teams, I think from that perspective, that might generate interest. But certainly when we're all back in the office, I can highly recommend that as an approach to generating interest and selling the value of automation or any type of testing improvement that you're doing.
Thanks, Steph. Carl?
It's pretty hard to jump on and raise any new points that Dean and Kathleen and yourself have not covered, to be honest. But I do want to reiterate, I guess, a couple of things. The biggest thing that we see is there's two approaches that people take. And a lot of the time they focus purely on the technical aspects. And like you said, Dean, if you're not talking the language of people in the business who don't have a lot of time, and to be honest, you should feel lucky a lot of the time to get in front of someone who's at high management. And you can't waste your time talking about technical aspects. Hey, my CICD, we've reduced it by, a minute and a half. That means X, Y, Z, right? A lot of people are just going to go, so what? And I think that there really needs to be a lot more planning phase when you are looking at something like automation, where you don't have it in the organization to look at, okay, what is going to be the long-term impact here from an ROI side of things? What business benefits is it going to give? And when I ultimately leave or step aside into a different role, how easy is this going to be to explain, maintain, and hand over to someone else? How can I create something that can become a living, application for the rest of the team to support? a lot of people tend to forget that an automation framework is effectively a bespoke application that you have created to test another application. You know, so a lot of people think, oh, look, it's open source, it's fantastic. That's great, but there's still a lot of effort that goes into actually creating and maintaining something like a test automation framework, and it must be taken into consideration. I think, like the guys have said, you know, show and tell is usually the best way to actually show people. Humans are very visual creatures. If I see automation running as opposed to seeing it on a slide, I'm going to go, give me a live demo every single time. You know, I want to see it actually happening. A bit of that as well is also, it comes down to the same, you know, theory I run with my wife, which is it's usually better to beg for forgiveness than ask permission. You know, some of the time, if you do have a real belief that this can cause a great change in the organization or really help out the immediate team, spending a bit of time yourself and investing effort, you know, in creating it, maybe it's out of hours, maybe it's on your weekends, you know, that can go a long way. And I think it showcases to people that, hey, you know, you're serious. This may be something we should look into, as opposed to, you know, badgering people around automation. Another one of the areas is obviously, and we do this a lot, is, you know, forums such as these, you know, showcasing and demonstrating and talking about automation. Invite your colleagues to, you know, show some of these cool things that are happening on the market as well. A lot of the time, it's a great way for them to also do some networking to understand, you know, what the testing community is doing, and also what, you know, new cool tools that are coming through the pipeline as well.
Thanks, Carl. I'm going to keep our panelists guessing now, and I'm going to switch straight to a Q&A question. We've had quite a few questions come through different channels throughout this session, and I'm going to read one out from Schlock Jane. My question to the panel: while almost all companies following agile Scrum sprints for software development, the real challenge is test engineers are getting less time to validate, sometimes almost no time to check. Do you think 2-week sprints, where most of the time is actually consumed in development and other discussion, the real black box testing, manual check time is getting reduced? I'm going to throw that one over to Cheryl.
Thanks for that one, Cam. It's a really good question, and something that we do see in reality quite a bit. I think in the current organisation where I work, one of the key things which we're trying to do is the team. So I'm talking about one individual team, but this same strategy can go across multiple teams, is that the team defines their own working agreement, and the team defines their own definition of done. And their team defines, you know, at what point can I say that, you know, a ticket, for example, can move from one column, which might be dev in your world or might be something else, to test. So, and that's where you've got the opportunity to say, it's not just a tester's responsibility to do the tests once it gets to them. What testing is done before it gets to them as well? If you follow a Kanban model, then, you know, the developers need to make sure that everything is done before it even reaches you. I would highly argue that you don't want to say, when you're finished with all of your dev stuff, just give it to me and I'll test it thereafter, because that will be a bottleneck. It'll either be a bottleneck or you'll have a quality risk because things are going through too quickly and you don't pay attention to your own definition of done, which is something that I see quite regularly. Teams have the best of intentions to say, I should really be doing X, Y, and Z. But then under pressure, what can happen is that they drop those things. And if I love sports, so I'm going to do a very fast sports analogy. But what they do in sports and elite sports is that they would make sure that you train under pressure, so that when you get into a real game, you will do the same thing under pressure that you've been training the whole time. And that kind of comes back to your definition of done, to say, this is what we should be doing. We need to make it our innate behavior.
Absolutely, Cheryl. I'm going to cross to Rachika for her perspective on this as well.
Yeah, I agree with Cheryl. I guess the team has to work together to define their definition of done. It's a good idea, again, to bring quality up front as well when we are doing the sprint planning or whatever your ceremonies are. Just determine what sort of quality outcomes do we need out of the features that we have prioritized as part of the sprint, that are a part of the deliverable for the sprint, and what all kind of testing needs to be done. So that needs to be determined by you guys as a team, to say, okay, we just need to do functional testing or functional regression testing, and this is how much time we need within the sprint to test all those sort of feature changes. And I guess in terms of regression testing as well, you might want to do a bit of impact analysis during the sprint planning in terms of what all existing functionality is going to be impacted by the changes that you're doing in the current sprint, and do a bit of like a risk-based regression testing, so you don't have to do everything by the end of the sprint, and like minimize the risk to the delivery as well. Thanks, Cam.
Thanks, Ruchika. And definitely, as far as stories of struggle go, like our definition of done is shot all over the wall at the moment. I mean, we're only really coming back to full-time work now at Tabcorp. And, 5 or 6 months ago, if you'd asked me about our definition of done, I said, I would have said we've put it together as a team. The teams are really getting on board. We've got it next to our sprint wall. People are referring to it. We're trying to always put time in our sprints to make sure we can get some automation done as part of QA before it goes to done. But the fact of the matter is that's pretty much out the window now after the impacts of COVID on our team. In fact, a more innocent me a couple of weeks ago was thinking, when we get back to full time, I'll revert to doing my practice work. I'll start all the meetings up again. I'll get those improvements and innovative tasks back in sprint, and it'll be great. But reality was I came back and a lot of our great work had actually, it effectively deflated. Like it had died off a bit. Just lack of passion, inspiration, the shock of COVID and the impact of that on everyone's lives. So we're struggling right now. We're trying to piece it all back together. And really our plan is to get back to pre-COVID. And then we'll start worrying about what we can do next. We've got another great question come through. I'm going to go straight to it.
I wanted to add something as well. It's also good to involve developers with testing if you are really struggling. I mean, quality really is everyone's responsibility. And if there is a lot of testing backlog, it's always good to give developers also a chance to test what they have developed. Even like if they have not developed, then again, they are like testers as well, right? And they don't know what you don't know about the functionality. So it's a good idea to give them a taste of testing as well.
What if I jump in for a sec, Cam, just quickly?
Okay.
I would say, just to put it sort of plainly, as far as I'm concerned, being a tester amongst many, many developers, you're almost always going to end up being the roadblock. And it's a fairly common problem. Sometimes I think the way to solve the problem is to not look at the problem in a very lateral way. It's go a little bit different, and that is fix the quality problem by working with the BAs, with the developers, with the designers, build the quality in at the very start. And then as a team, as discussed by Ruchika and also by Cheryl, then work with the team to say which of these scenarios would we want to test as a team, working on the assumption that you've already built a lot of the thinking that you were going to do in the testing, you've already built it into the design. So quality is now already increased in the story. So you're already in a much better place. You've been proactive as opposed to relying on a reactive model where you're going to be hamstrung by lack of resources.
Just 2 seconds on that as well, if I can. I think, another way to accelerate or maybe stretch how much testing you have is to look at your tester in a different way. And maybe they can be a quality coach or a test coach across your entire team. So that way you can unblock it a different way.
Absolutely, Cheryl. Anyone else with any comments on that?
I was going to say, actually, and I think it relates to another question that was raised. I couldn't agree more with the comments that were just raised by Ruchika, Dean and Cheryl. Where I've seen quality built in really well during an agile life cycle is, obviously during sprint planning, you should be discussing the stories that are coming in. At refinement, you should be ironing out some of the ambiguities. Once that story comes into the sprint, before a developer is about to implement it or a designer is about to work with a developer to design and implement, as Ruchika said, you should have the developer, the tester, the BA, the architect, whoever needs to be in the room to talk about what's about to be built, what the requirement is, and how the developer is going to build it and how the developer is going to test it. And then the tester can look at that and say, well, okay, you were going to test it like that. This is how I planned on testing it. Okay, so the developer now goes off with more information than they had. A lot of the assumptions have hopefully been ironed out, and they build something that is closer to what the requirement is. and they've tested it themselves. And then right before the tester starts testing it, they have a handover or a handshake where the developer says, okay, this is what I needed to build. This is what I did build. Here's how I tested it. You know, I realized there might have been these other gaps, so I filled those. And how are you going to test it? And then the tester can say, well, based on everything I've learned now and on what I planned, here's how I'm going to test it. So that there's communication and collaboration happening across that life cycle for each story and task that's implemented. That way, as Dean said, you're building quality in rather than just having to test to find when quality isn't present.
One thing, a funny thought I just thought of while Kathleen was speaking is that where Cheryl and I first worked together about 11 years ago, only the developers estimated. The testers were assumed to just do whatever was needed to be tested. But what we've learned in those 11 years since then is that something can actually be done very, very quickly by a developer that actually takes a lot of time to test. And conversely, there are things that can take a long time for a developer to do that actually don't take a lot of time to test. So actually having estimation as a first-class citizen amongst the engineers on the project, it gives a much more realistic and a plannable amount of work to go do. So that theoretically, the very problem that the questioner asked is that it sounds like the team is not working in a sustainable way because they're planning more work than they can possibly consume. And it sounds like they're just assuming that the tester can keep up. When the reality is, if they had a voice and they could actually say how much effort is involved, they could actually resource balance around the work involved.
The devs can also add more unit testing if they've got time instead of picking up something and pushing it into the life cycle. I mean, it depends whether or not you've got deadlines on time or deadlines on whatever it is that you're delivering. But yeah, I would certainly see that that's an option to say, unless they've got amazing 100% unit test coverage, which is unlikely, that's something that they could focus on.
Thanks, everyone. If anyone's noticing me looking down a couple of times, it's just watching survey results coming in. Everyone's doing an amazing job. It's amazing how many people have got so many correct. It's going to be a very close call for the top 4 to get those big prizes. But we'll announce those soon. We'll cross straight into another question in the Q&A. So I really like the idea of this one from Helen Ma, which is, I have a question of how testers can make sure the test coverage of the code change done by the developers for the Jira ticket. And I guess this really goes back to the idea of, you know, do you believe in, if there's 5 requirements in a Jira ticket, you know, should all those 5 requirements be represented and automated in the testing? I guess the big question is, though, how do you approach coverage? Because a lot of business people definitely ask for it. They know, you know, and let's be honest, a lot of sales business people come in and try and sell tools with it. They'll say, you know, we'll get you up to 100% coverage, of which many testers who work in the actual field know that's absolute bollocks. But I'm curious to hear what the panel think of that. You know, showing coverage, how important is it? How do you approach it? And I'm going to push it over to Kathleen.
Yeah, so I think similar to what we were talking about before, where I've seen quality and communication and collaboration working really well within teams, and that building quality in, is when developers and testers will sit together and review each other's tests. So a developer should be able to walk a tester through their test suite and say, well, these are the things that I've covered during testing. And that will tell you, oh, they've covered no boundary values. Their testing only is at a unit level. It's never going to cover end-to-end scenarios. Their testing will be probably quite positive. It'll prove that the requirement has been met rather than trying to break the requirement and negatively test it. And they might not cover all scenarios. They might only cover one positive scenario, not the 5 different ways you could approach access that requirement. So I think, you know, if testers and developers are respecting each other, it's really good to have them sitting together and walking through each other's test suites. Similarly, the developer can look at the tester's suite and tell them if they've missed anything from a technical perspective. A good example is, I was working with a company who had a non-functional requirement that wasn't specified on a card. As a result of the change, there were some changes to the database made, and the tester didn't know that the database had changed. There were fields that were merged, fields that were split, and fields that were dropped altogether. And that definitely needed some data migration testing. Now, if the tester had have talked through what had changed with the developer on a detailed level and how they'd tested each change, that might have been picked up. Unfortunately, it wasn't picked up and it slipped through. So I think definitely better communication and collaboration is a great way to approach it.
Thanks, Kathleen. I'm going to cross over to Carl.
Cool. I'll just ignore the comment about organizations that claim to get to the 100% test coverage, all right? So actually, we never claim that much. But I mean, one of the big things that we've looked at is a lot of the time when sort of, that test coverage component, a lot of things are done at the individual story card level, right? So if we look at a story card, we have a development change, we design a test specifically for that. And I think the biggest thing with coverage is actually getting familiarity with the system and the business you're actually working for and saying, okay, say for example, if I work for Tabcorp, what does the customer actually do when they walk up to a terminal and they place a bet, hypothetically, right? What is that process? How do they, let's go and we'll go to a machine and look at that. When I was working for a lot of the telcos, we would actually go out to the retail stores and actually go through that process side by side in the actual store, on Siebel, through CRM, through the order processing, looking and going, right, so this is how it's designed, this is how it's written the requirements, but this is actually how it happens. And that's one way of actually getting out and about and looking and going, we need to adjust our test coverage that matches actually the customer experience and the requirement and feed that information back as well. So there are two ways to look at it. I really like the pragmatic approach, like Kathleen said, of communication, of walking through step by step. Okay, so show me how this code's written if you're, development inclined, and show me, which breakpoint, what are you going to a different scenario? Why is it handling this way? And hey, if it fails, what am I going to expect to get, back as an error handling? So looking at that happy path and negative path. The other way to look at it is mathematically applying it and saying, okay, I have, a variation that runs through 3 different systems. I've got 5 data points. I've got, 100 different points of data. I'm not going to be able to test all of them. So how do I then assign a risk weighting based on the types of data that are coming through? What's the most common component that we use in each one of these steps? What's the business risk associated with them? And looking at it that way and applying some mathematical formulas to say, okay, I've got this amount of time, and applying it that way as well. But for me, I always found the best way was actually to walk, so to speak, walk a mile in the customer's shoes and actually see what's the current process at the moment, what's the change we're willing to make, and designing the testing in that way. So it's sort of taking a UAT approach and then converting that into sort of a technical suite of tests to make sure we're actually proving what we want to prove.
Thanks, Carl. Well said. I'm going to cross to another Q&A and just keep us on our toes, especially cognizant of the time now, with just 10 minutes to go. I love this question from Sakina Aditi. How can we approach accessibility testing in general? I feel it does get overlooked, or its importance is not emphasized enough. I'm going to cross to Cheryl for that one.
It's an excellent question, and yeah, definitely see the same challenges happening. I suppose, like anything, there are tools that you can use that can enable that. One of the key questions I would ask is that, do you have accessibility requirements? Because certainly some of the organizations that I've worked in, they don't even think about it. So if I was to go up to them and say we should be thinking about accessibility testing, then you'd need to go back to the root and see, well, do they need to have AA compliance? Is it customer facing? Is it a government application? Who are the customers that use it? So if it's with the company that I work with Civica, we have lots of community-based software. We have local government software. We have school software. So we absolutely need to maintain that compliance. For us, it comes initially, we start off with designing right. So, there's no point going off and developing something and say, can you please test that it's accessible? So we absolutely start with, well, who are our customers? Who are our users? And whichever way you want to define those. And then we make sure that we're getting that design right up front. But again, absolutely comes back to your requirements. And then, as much as anything else, see what tools are available. So whether or not it's something like JAWS might be an example for you. But yeah, it's really important. And like Cameron was probably saying a while back, we need to make sure that these things are really visible, because otherwise people won't think about it. But really good question.
Does anyone else have any perspective on this accessibility testing? I'll admit we're not world leaders in Tabcorp, that's for sure.
I'd be keen to jump in. Look, so WCAG 2.0 and 1.0 couldn't be more different. 1.0, you could look at an image, look at its alt tag. If it had an alt tag, you were good. The thing with WCAG 2.0 is that what might be good for someone with a cognitive disorder, so in other words, it might be a complex action, you might show some images or a video that explains how to do something, will score very highly for someone with a cognitive disorder, but will do nothing for someone who's blind. So it's to what Cheryl was just saying, I'm going to go take that up a level again, which is it's not just your design, it's also your development framework and your whole team's embracement of accessibility and inclusiveness as to who your customers are and who your audiences are. The actual testing part actually should be a secondary effect of that design choice. So when you're saying somebody has declared they use a screen reader, then they should be getting a version of the website designed for someone who's going to use a screen reader. Or they have a cognitive disorder, they're announcing it, the website is producing something for them with that particular disorder. The testing and the test automation that might come from it is a direct reaction of that design choice. So in many ways, if you're asking that question, what I would encourage you to do is to go back and actually have that discussion to say, if we are going to be targeting people for certain disabilities, and therefore we're expecting a WCAG AA or A or AAA rating, then what does that mean for the way that the software is going to work for that customer? Which will then naturally lead you to how I'm going to validate or invalidate that we're meeting that level.
Yeah, completely agree, actually. And if I could add, if you are limited and your company's not letting you invest in accessibility testing, there is the option, as Cheryl said, of using tools that automate accessibility testing. The typical automated tool, especially freeware tools, typically only cover about 30% of WCAG 2.1 requirements or 2.0 requirements. But it's 30% is better than nothing, and at least you'll know something about where your application stands. And I think that if you can gather information on the risk that not being accessible poses to your company, poses to the reputation of your company, and poses to your users' ability to interact with your systems and how that would impact on your company, that's one way to sometimes convince the powers that be that it's worth investing in.
Very well said, Kathleen. All right, we're just looking at the clock. It is time to wrap up. As you can see, we did not prepare for this panel. That's not to say that everyone didn't do an amazing job, but we definitely didn't prepare, and that's what this is all about. It's unscripted. The only thing we knew going into this panel was the general themes we were going to discuss. On that note, I will go into a bit of a thank you, which is scripted, just so I don't forget anything, and then we're going to draw the prizes. So before we conclude Testing Talks Online and I announce our prize winners, I want to do a big final thank you. First and foremost, to our amazing attendees that have joined us today. You know, it's not possible without having incredible attendees to join us, get involved, become speakers. In that tone, thanks to our industry-leading testers that joined us today as panelists, and our innovative partners as well. They really do make it all possible. They fund the platform and they fund the prizes. Our partners really are aligned in the Testing Talks vision that our community deserves more fun days in their calendar to learn, share, and have fun. So thanks again to Tricentis, Headspin, Source Labs, Red Wolf, and Ross. Many of you might have heard of our partners. You know, Tricentis, obviously represented today by Carl. Tricentis empower our testing community by helping us become automation experts through their products, services, and training. It's a world-leading platform. Tricentis Tosca helps to accelerate testing with a low-code, no-code approach. Headspin, they've been with us since the start. They actually sponsored us first for Testing Talks conference. They really had that belief and alignment that this is going to be super fun and our community does deserve more fun days together. You know, they're a platform to take your mobile experience to the next level. You know, and what did amaze me and why I really liked Headspin at first and why I was actually interested in their product to start with and how I met the guys from Headspin is that the platform actually gives access to thousands of devices and endpoints all around the world. So these are real devices you can actually do manual and automation testing on. So, you know, if you've got a desire to do automation in Brisbane or Sydney from Melbourne, or you want to test something in San Francisco, that platform will allow it. And it's really, really good. You know, Red Wolf and Roche, some of you have heard of them. I've worked with some of them, but basically they're a digital IT sales and marketing recruitment consultancy working in partnership with top companies, startups and agencies to find talented people to do amazing work. And I'd say if you're currently looking for any sort of work or employment, definitely reach out to the Red Wolf and Roche team. And last but definitely not least, Source Labs, another first-time sponsor, along with Red Wolf and Roche. They're a leading provider of continuous testing solutions that deliver digital confidence. I mean, with the Source Labs Continuous Testing Cloud, you can be confident your web and mobile apps will look, function, and perform exactly as they should on every browser, OS, and device every single time. And I know most people I've worked with have heard of Source Labs. Many of us actually want to use it. It's just a matter of getting it in the budget. The winner of the prizes today, let's do it. So Whew, wow. We've had 85 people complete the survey, which is absolutely incredible. Just so people know as well, the total amount of people that joined throughout today was actually 150 people, representing some 100 companies from around Melbourne and Sydney, which is absolutely amazing. So we've got Namresh Saraya, who has won the JBL wireless, the wireless speaker. We've got Lee Hawkins, who has won the $200 Amazon gift card. Congratulations, Lee. We've got Sakina Aditi, who actually contributed one of our great questions on accessibility testings. She will be actually taking home a $200 JD gift card, which is amazing. And then finally, we've got Tony Quinn, who will be taking home the wireless Bluetooth headset from Pioneer, which is really cool. So congratulations to all those winners. We'll actually send out emails to all the winners to work out your contact details and best address. Yeah, congratulations. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again to our amazing panelists. And please feel free to leave any feedback you might have directly via LinkedIn to our panelists directly. We're looking to do this again in another couple of months with a new topic, great new speakers, and we're just going to keep bringing us together, dealing out some great prizes, having some fun, and hopefully we'll be out of COVID soon and we can go back to the office and enjoy each other's company again. Thanks a lot, everyone.
And thank you, Cam, for running a brilliant session. That was really fantastic. Well run.
Great. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.